Welcome everyone to Calc Scripts for Mere Mortals. What has changed since Solutions 2007? This is my actual presentation from 2007. I didn't wear a hat back in 2007. For that matter, I didn't wear a mask either. What's really interesting about this session is, other than the fact that it's 4:3 ratio, which is just abysmal to look at after all these years, it also has little notes from their template that come across. So on this one, it says, this is title art that appeals to CIOs. I'm not sure what exactly appeals about that. Maybe CIOs like whiteboards, or they like guys in burnt orange shirts with really horrendous ties. But anyway, we are going to talk through, based on my original session, what is still applicable and what is not. And just to show you how embarrassing some things were, I've left in my marketing material from 2007. We had just published what I like to call Essbase for Mere Mortals, the Copyright Infringement Edition. And this was the slide I wrote, let's call it half a book on Essbase. And with basically 6-7 weeks before the conference, Oracle announces in 2007 that they're buying Hyperion, and that this will be the final solutions conference ever, which was true until 2020. So I hurriedly went to Tracy and said, Tracy, could you say goodbye to your family? And please do me a favor and finish this book. She's like, well, what have you written? And I said, I've written all the framing, I've written all the humor, I've written the fictional parts. I all it really needs is content. Actual bullets and things and step-by-step instructions. And Tracy's like, I got you. So this was the first book. The reason I called the copyright/trademark infringement edition is we had 500 copies printed, thinking we would never sell them all. We sold all 500 in the 3 days of Solutions 2007. So then we were like, wow, we should actually go do a second print run. Let's go trademark the title. And the attorney called us back and they said, well, I've got some good news and some bad news about your Hyperion Essbase for Immortals and Insiders Guide. And I was like, well, what's the bad news? And he's like, well, anything that ends in for Mere Mortals has already been trademarked in the computer world. And it's like, what's the good news? And they said, well, anything with an insider's guide has also been trademarked. And so I said, okay, well, how is that in any way good news? And it's like, because you get to start completely fresh. And now we look smarter than you are with various books, and we're up to 15 books. And I also thought it was adorable. You could only get it at interval.com back then, but now they're on Amazon. So what we're going to talk about today, based on Solutions 2007, is a little bit of background on the concepts of databases and how you calculate them. We're going to talk about what is a calc script, some simple calculations, some calculation categories, some advanced topics. The original presentation from 2007 was a rather loftily impressive 45 minutes long. I'm sorry, an hour long. We only have 45 minutes today, so I'm not going to be able to do as much teaching as I did back in 2007. Plus, I need to cover the new stuff that has occurred. So I'm going to hit it faster than I normally would, but the whole deck will be out there. Oh, by the way, that was the old impossible to read in a small format logo down there in the bottom left corner. I don't know why we ever thought a serif font was a really good idea to blow up onto a PowerPoint screen. So, oh, by the way, the note from the old Hyperion conference for this one says, this slide eases transitions and makes segues interesting. So I'm not sure why, but we're going to cover some background as part of this. So on each one, I'm trying to highlight kind of what's the same. And if something is completely different, I'm doing a whole slide on it. And if something is new, I'm trying to call it out in a bit of a blue font. So back then, we did have ASO cubes, but they were essentially for aggregation only and some very, very simple member formula type calculations. So realistically, what we had is, whether it was BSO or the infancy of ASO, you either could just consolidate up the whole outline, basically run the equivalent of a CALC ALL or a CALC DIM. Member formulas, we had, there was MDX on the ASO side, of the Essbase Calc Script language on the block storage side. We did have member formulas that gave us some additional functionality. And a lot of people viewed this Calc Script language as being one of the major differentiators between Essbase and what was the #1 competitor back in 2007, Microsoft Analysis Services. You could also take those member formulas plus add a whole lot of other more powerful things we're going to cover over the next 45 minutes and run what were called calc scripts. Well, in terms of big picture, a lot has changed. We didn't really have Calc Manager back then. And now, especially with EPM Cloud, where we're going to create those calculations for planning, for financial consolidation and close across the whole Oracle EPM Cloud suite, we'd be doing this inside of Calc Manager. We also didn't really talk about hybrid Essbase back then. It was just a twinkle in a developer's eye, where we could actually say, let's take the power of block storage at the bottom, so we can use those really cool member formulas, and let's use aggregate storage for all that upper level stuff across the whole thing. So hybrid Essbase is something I can't really touch on now. Some people say it took 10 years to get ready for prime time. It is now the default in the newer versions of Essbase. So I think it was the default in OAC Essbase. It's definitely the default in Essbase 19C, and it will be the default in Essbase 21C coming out in the next 60 days or so. Hashtag safe harbor. Groovy, we now have in the EPM Cloud. So if there's something that the language doesn't support, or if you want a true programming language, we now have the ability to do Groovy as part of EPM Cloud Enterprise. And this one, I had to go verify because it seems like they've been there for forever. We didn't have the ability to run a lot of like those cool things that Tim Faish was talking about, where we can actually do MDX, parameterized calcs, ASO calculations, the ability to execute the equivalent of calc scripts, but not using calc script language, wasn't even there in 2007. As far back as we can look, it was maybe 2008, 2009, but again, it just wasn't there back then, so it doesn't get addressed in the rest of the presentation. Now, because ASO calc scripts weren't there in 2007, the rest of this presentation is going to be on block storage, and hybrid definitely wasn't there. So we're going to talk mostly about block storage. I'm going to give you some tips on things. So first of all, when you're calculating something, whether your dimensions are dense or whether they are sparse, which we're not going to explain what that means right now, and the order that your dimensions are in does affect your calculation. So when you're running a default calc, a calc all, a calc dim, what it's going to do is it's going to look to whatever your accounts dimension is first. Now, historically, back in olden timey days, people made that accounts dimension entirely, almost 100% of the time they made it dense. Time, they most also likely made it dense. Part of that was because Essbase likes to calculate those two dimensions first. So what happens if your accounts dimension is sparse or your time dimension is sparse? It's still, when left to its own devices, is going to calculate the accounts dimension first, even if it's sparse, which is going to create a whole lot more blocks in your database. It's going to show your calculation down a ton. One of the rumors that I had to dispel back in 2007 was that the next thing it calculated was all the remaining dense dimensions in the order they're in the outline. That is not true. It used to be true. Most people still believe it. But if you run a calc dim on the dimensions, it actually can internally re-optimize that order. So it can calculate your dense dimensions in a slightly different order than you think. But the third step is all the remaining dense dimensions with you having far less control than you think you do. The fourth thing it's going to calculate is all the remaining sparse dimensions, which for the most part, it is going to do in outline order with the exception of things that it's trying to parallelize nowadays on calc. And then finally, it's going to do your two-pass calculations. And if those are on, if you do have a two-pass on a sparse dimension, it is going to do your entire script a second time. So just be aware. I know a lot of you have questions. Please use the little Q&A bar. It's down at the bottom there of the Zoom window. Click on the Q&A button, ask everything. I have my better, smarter, more senior half, Glenn Schwartzberg, who will be answering lots and lots of questions. So ask whatever you want on calc scripts. Make this a Stump Glenn day. So in terms of a calc script, big picture, it's a text file that contains Essbase Calc Script language. So we're going to be able to do things like, we don't want to use intelligent calculation. We want to calculate the whole database. We want to start off by blanking out budget wherever it appears. We want to take budget and make it 10% higher than actuals, which is how a lot of us think that our CFO's budget. Take whatever you've got, make your budget slightly higher until you miss budget. And then calc all is a very, very powerful 7 letters. It's going to calculate the entire database in its own idea of an optimized order and all those two-pass calculations. There are a lot of things that calc scripts let us do that don't happen as part of a default calc and don't happen with the calculation of the database. We can control to some level the order in which we calculate, for good or for bad. I've seen some people that have taken over the calculation order and have made it pass, not exaggeration, I saw one that passed over 10,000 times through the database because of how they had it written. So if you know better than the database, definitely define the calc order. If you do not know better than your database, best to leave it up to the database. It can let us calculate a subset of the database. We can clear out portions of the queue. We can copy data. We didn't have it back then, and I know we're not really talking ASO, but we can now do things like clearing databases on the ASO side and clearing portions of those. We can come up with formulas not in the outline. You don't really want to say budget equals actual times 1.1 and store that in your database, because then you would never be able to achieve budget. You can do things like looping. If you have to have an iterative calculation that kind of zeroes in on a specific value, you can do that through a calc script. You make temporary variables. All that is the same. What has changed? We now have, just within the BSO world, much more powerful ways to export our data, including within a calc script. We have the ability to push data out. As I said before, we now have ASO calc scripts, whatever you want to call them. We have calc manager rules. We can use Groovy scripts to do much more interesting things than a calc script ever could. We could, for instance, in a Groovy script that kind of launches like a calc script, we can kick off data management. We can do a data load. We can do a dimension build. We can map data from point to point. We can say, based on whatever you're showing on your form, limit it down to just some valid intersections as part of that. We can do custom validations. Well, maybe we don't want the calc script to occur if our budget has increased too much or our headcount has decreased too much. You can do those validations inside of that Groovy script and kick off things. For instance, we want notifications or whatever to appear. The calc script editor, for the most part, by the way, I did get a kick out of the product name being Hyperion Essbase XTD Analytic Services. The actual full name of Essbase, to include both all the Essbase products at the time of closing, was Hyperion System 9 Business Intelligence Plus Analytic Services, which I did verify it has exactly the same number of syllables as supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Thank you to Oracle for switching the name from as long as it kept getting with every version back to simply Oracle Essbase. So we have what used to be an XD Analytics Services editor. We now have just go into EAS, the Calc Script editor, or the Jet UI if you're on 19C. Keep in mind, it is a text file, so you can open it up in Notepad. You're kind of working without a warranty. You don't get to see the nice color coding and if it's working, but it's totally fine. I do a lot of calc script editing in text files. I've even done something on my phone when people have sent me a calc script and said, Edward, could you optimize this? And yes, I can still edit a calc script. Glenn Schwartzberg challenges me on this. It is the one thing I still think I am damn good at in Essbase is calc script editing. So obviously we have Calc Manager. It's a much more powerful tool for us. Once you get up to the cloud, you do have the new Jet user interface. So that came with OAC Essbase. It got dramatically enhanced. I actually wasn't a big fan of that first iteration of OAC Essbase, but Essbase 19C, it's actually my preferred way to look at calcs and look at outlines now. We do have the old kind of calc script editor that sort of typed things in, and it was kind of it really was designed to look as much as possible like Essbase Application Manager, which dates back to 1994 or 1995. So suffice to say, it looks a lot better now. Within the editor, it looks like it was built within this last millennium, but it's really easy to see your calc script. It's really easy to do member search, and you still have the ability to look through your outline and insert things. You have your work area that nicely color codes. You have all of your functions. You can quickly get to help as part of them. Simplest calc script of all is still, to this day, calc all. Now, keep in mind, your default calc will default to calc all, but you can change your default. The default calc script is the one calc script inside of Essbase that actually compiles. Normally a calc script is what's called an interpreted language, meaning at the time you run it, it has to verify that your syntax is correct and figure out what order it wants to do things and kind of convert those into an internal code. The default calc script, which defaults to calc all, is precompiled. So if you have a calc that you always 100% of the time want to run it as this, just like you could in 2007, you still can today, replace that default calc script with whatever your script is. It will compile, it will run faster. I've done all the timing on it to prove it out. Syntax, still the same. Looks like a lot of other languages they were trying to parallel at the time. Kind of looks like I do a lot of Python lately. It looks a whole lot like Python. Semicolons, kind of an RC type holdover. It is not case sensitive, so unless you're doing something that makes it case sensitive. By the way, this PowerPoint slide is doing something that causes problems. Notice the inverted quotes around opening inventory. This happens when you pass a calc script through PowerPoint or you pass it through Microsoft Word. You have no idea how many times somebody has sent a script to somebody else, they paste it and said, your script doesn't run, and it eventually turned out just because the quotes were turned in. They have to be straight up and down quotes. So simple calculations, you can always just tell it to calculate a member. So if you have a sparse member in the outline that has a formula on it, that's not horrendous, provided you don't do calc all, where it's going to calculate a very specific, terribly unoptimal format. If you've got a formula that you always want to be on a sparse member, but you only want to calculate that sparse member some of the time, it's totally fine. So in my case, I could make scenario my sparse dimension. I could have put a formula on the variance member, and I'm only going to calculate variance when I have changed budget. So don't let the system do it in a calc script. So whenever you see a member followed by a semicolon, it's either going to calculate the member formula on that member, or it's going to, if it's an aggregated member, it's going to do the aggregation into that member. So if instead of variance, I had put total United States, semicolon with quotes around it, it would know to do the aggregation of the members right below total United States into total United States. You can overwrite the formula on a member. So for instance, if you had a profit member and it said profit equals sales minus cost of goods sold, and you're like, my bonus is based on profit, that's not nearly high enough, you can say profit equals profit times 2, and you can double it. By the way, not 100% Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. That is still true to this day. We can calc all, we can calc dim, we can calc ag. These have not changed at all. Be aware they have changed a bit the optimization internally. I did notice it on a calc dim. I think way back in 2007, it more stuck to the order you put it in there. So if you put your dimensions in order and put it in commas, it paid attention to that. It no longer seems to pay attention to that. It decides internally on the calc dim and the ag what order it's going to do those dimensions. You still do have to turn your intelligent calc off if you want to operate on the whole database, unless you've turned intelligent calc off for your whole database, which you still have the setting available to do. You can still calculate a subset of your data. Most people forget that calc all has some optional arguments. If, for instance, you have a 14-dimensional outline and one of your dimensions is scenario, and you don't want to calculate that one every time, most people think that you have to break that into a calc dim and an ag for all those dimensions except the one you want to do. You don't. You can do a calc all except, and you don't even have to cut out a whole dimension or series of dimensions. You can cut out a member or series of members, which can be very powerful. If, for instance, you want to do a calc all, but you've got a member formula to pass on a sparse dimension, you can say calc all except that member or series of members that you want to omit. Fix works essentially the same as it did. I don't think we had fix parallel back then. Stop me if I'm wrong, Glenn Schwartzberg, but I think that came in after. So now we have the ability to not just calc parallel, which I believe did exist in 2007, but we now have fix parallel to determine what members we wanted to splice that parallel calculation along.
Fix parallel came in 11.123.500.
So much later than 2007, yes. So I was correct, but I would understate it. I thought it came in longer ago than that. I knew it was after 2007, though. Yeah, so it dates back to this decade when we actually get fixed parallel. Thank you, Glenn. So cross-dimensional operator looks like a little dash and a greater than symbol because it's a dash followed by a greater than symbol is how you type it in. One of my personal favorite things in the old Essbase application managers and the Calc Script editor, there was an arrow button, a cross-dim button you could click on. When you clicked on it, it literally just put a dash and a greater than symbol for people that didn't know that there is no arrow that you're going to be typing in. You still need to limit down your cross dims. I encourage people to think about pivoting their calculations. There are a lot of examples that are still there in the Essbase technical reference, which we'll cover in a little bit, that are, to put it politely, outdated. But also just they focus on giving you an example and don't focus on things that make sense. So there's somewhere, and maybe it's been removed now, but there used to be in the documentation an example of how to do a cross dim, and it would say fix on budget sales equals sales cross dim actual times 1.1. It not only runs faster to spin that around, but also it's easier if you want to add other members and do the same thing to just kind of pivot it. So if you start to see repeating words or you start to see cross dims, ask yourself if it has to be a cross dim or if there's another way to mentally spin that calculation that you're doing. Keep in mind, when it's doing a cross dim, what it means is whatever member I'm calculating, go point to a different one. So some people use cross dims and they'll say something like sales cross dim actual equals 17. Way that's actually working is it's grabbing sales for budget and then setting sales actual to 17. It's grabbing sales for forecast and then setting sales actual to 17. It's grabbing sales for what if and then setting sales actual to 17. So the cross dim says, I don't care what member I'm on, go work on this other member, go get the value from the other member, but it's still pulling in that member that you don't necessarily need. In terms of defining calc order, as I said, in 2007, it was mostly true that it did the dense dimensions in outline order and the sparse dimensions in outline order. If I could say the concept is the same, but those two sub bullets about remaining dense and remaining sparse is not necessarily true anymore. Particularly the one on dense. If you say calc dim, whatever, time comma accounts, it's going to flip it. It's going to do accounts comma time on you pretty much 100% of the time. It doesn't matter what order they're in the outline, doesn't matter what order you specify them in the calc dim. Just be aware internally, it's trying to do this for your own benefit. So it's trying to optimize what's happening behind the scenes. Clear data is still the same. I will encourage you just in terms of an optimization standpoint. A clear block works on sparse dimensions and it works much faster than a clear data on sparse dimensions because clear block works on index entries. It doesn't really pull in your memory or pull in your block into memory, then blank it out and write blanks back out to the system. It just kind of forgets that the block is there. Same way that a file system works. It doesn't actually take your file and load it in and blank, set everything to 0 and then write it back out. It just says, reclaim that space, use it for something else. So clear block works that way. However, clear block will work on dense members as well in combinations of sparse dimensions. It will also work in combinations of dense dimensions. So in that top example, when I say fix on fruit soda in Texas, the way it works from before 2007 to now is it'll say, okay, fix, go grab from the index the entries that are actually there. So fruit soda Texas for 2019 might be there, but fruit soda Texas for 2020 might not. It'll go grab those index entries. Then it'll blank them out and write, it basically say forget those. So what happens in that intriguing situation of fix on fruit soda Texas, comma, sales? Well, a lot of people think, okay, that's part of a block. And if I clear out that entry, I'm losing the whole thing, not just a sales slice of it. It's not actually what clear block does. Clear block in that case will actually switch to being a clear data, just a much more optimal version of a clear data. If it sees a dense member in a fix and then the clear block happens in that fix, it goes and grabs that block, does pull it in, does blank that slice of sales down to a series of zeros and writes them all back out again. The only time I ever use clear data is when I want to, on one pass, clear out a very specific dense dimension combination. Other than that, I'm almost always using fix. The reason I say one specific combination is if I say clear data actual sales, and then on the next line say clear data actual cost of goods sold, even though that is the same block, it will actually run it as 2 passes through the database. So I know this is not an optimization presentation, but I wanted to get it out there into the ether that it is still true. Do not use a series of clear datas. One of the calc scripts that I remember in my optimization career, they actually did clear data gen, clear data feb, clear data mar, all the way down to clear data December. It took 12 passes through the database to do that. So fix on January through December, clear block all. We'll do it in 1 pass. Copying data is still the same. We have some other more powerful methods we can do through Groovy, through MDX, but within a calc script, you can either use a data copy. You can also do an equals, so you don't have to use the data copy. I use data copy if I'm mostly copying entire blocks. Be aware a data copy followed by a data copy will do 2 passes through the database. So you really want to do everything in the fix and then just do 1 data copy within it. If you do want to do a subset, you can also just use the equals method. Be aware data copy creates blocks. The equals method, with a couple of exceptions that I don't have time to go into, the equals method will not. For the most part, it's just going to take what's on the right side and stick it onto the left side. You can do the sales equals sales budget, cost of goods sold equals cost of goods budget fix. To point it out, I would pivot that and do the one I did up above. So those 2 scripts are functionally identical, but I like the top one a whole lot more. But there are times when you want to cross dim. We're not going to cover them. Most people forget that Essbase does have some rudimentary looping, including the abilities to stop that loop. So for instance, bonus is always determined to be 10% of profit. Well, the first time you run it through, let's say your profit is $1,000. Well, bonus is going to be $100, but that just lowered your profit. So your profit is $900. So run through it again. Well, bonus is now 10% of 900, which is $90. Well, now my profit is 910. Run through it again, and now my bonus is $91, and so on. There are ways using E and logs and exponents that you can do that in 1 pass. Most people, they'll go, yeah, just loop about 30 times close enough, and let's call it a day. You still have the ability to create and use your temporary variables that are out there. I'm not going to cover it in this, although I did back in 2007, the difference between the var command and the array command, and gave some examples on why you would want to use each. Suffice to say, var is a single number. Array is a series of numbers based on how many members are in a specific dimension. In terms of categories, there aren't any new ones that I know of. Maybe they took trend and spun it out to its own. I can't remember the most recent tech ref, but suffice to say, it's mostly the same categories that were out there from back when. What they've done is they haven't added a ton, or very many at all, to conditional Boolean relation, calc operators, mathematical member set, range, financial allocation, forecasting, statistical, date and time. They have added a lot to the custom define, way too many to actually go into. Some of those functions they've tossed into custom define are not custom defined functions, CDFs that you create. They're ones that Calc Manager has created. It's really the planning team has driven a lot of new function creation. And because Calc Manager is what you use to create those calculation scripts for planning and for financial close and consolidation, rather than go bother the Essbase team to make it a built-in function, they kind of just wrote it as a custom defined function, and you can call those from Calc Manager. But be aware that Calc Manager, once it creates that function, you can call it outside of Calc Manager. So you can use your calc script to call it as well. Functions, same way we always did it. Function generally is something starting with an @ symbol. There are other categories, for instance, things like calc all and calc dim and data copy and clear data and clear block. Those are actually what are called calculation commands. So those are not functions. The tech ref is still available. So Google's your friend here. So go out and search for Essbase technical reference. Or you can search for OAC technical reference. If you're on OCI or 19C, search for Essbase calculation and query reference, I think is what it's called now, under 19C and OCI. It is updated. There is a documentation team that is focused on fixing all those horrible things that were back there in 2007. I had a whole subsection and diatribe on how bad the tech ref is back from 2007. For the most part, it's been fixed with one major exception. It is more of a lookup and less of a how-to. So Glenn Schwartzberg and I, as a labor of love, are converting the Essbase technical reference to a series of videos We've done, together with the two of us, Tracy and a few other people, we have converted over 50, might be closer to 75 at this point, of the top functions that we think are used most often. So if you want a whole 3-minute video on how to create a calc script, you want a 3-minute video on the fixed statement, you want a 3 to 5 minute video on data copy and a video on clear block. If you Google, by the way, some of those videos have started appearing on the main Google page. So if you go Google like whatever, Essbase TechRef, fixed statement, or Essbase TechRef Calc Script, you'll start to see our videos appear on Google page 1. Easiest way to get to them, epm.bi/videos. So epm.bi/videos, bookmark it, and I encourage you, read what the technical reference says, go watch Glenn or Tracy, or God forbid, one of mine, 3 to 5 minute videos. We will eventually make it through the whole technical reference. We've covered the major ones. There are some esoteric ones. I don't know if we'll ever do the currency conversion, the CCONV. I was really happy to see that had died in OAC Essbase, and they brought it back in Essbase 19C, because there is one Fortune 1 customer that still uses currency conversion. So let's talk advanced for a little bit. And I am going to turn it over to Glenn Schwartzberg to talk about one of the coolest advances that have happened in Essbase over the course of the last 13 years. And it's really it's an optimization game changer, but I'll turn it over to him in a second. I'll talk for a little bit, turn it over to Glenn. He'll turn it back over to me to finish this thing out. So nerds of focusing calculations, you still have your fix, you still have your if. Please put to death that fix on sparse, if on dense. It's an over simplification. It is just fine to fix on a dense member. Just don't fix on a dense member, do something and fix on a different dense member, do something and fix on a different dense member, do something and fix. If you're gonna fix on dense members, do it on a series of them like I did earlier with fix sales, cogs, do whatever you're gonna do and fix, that'll do it in one pass. Fix is a very optimal way of going through your database, because it does look for your existing index entries. That's the way the fix actually works. But keep in mind that if you do fix on some dense stuff and do things and go back and do another fix on some dense stuff, it is going to do multiple passes. So if you want to say do something to sales and do something different to cogs, that's when you want to do an if. So you can do an if on an is member or a few other different ways within that fix statement. Creating blocks, it's still important, and we pivoted away from caring particularly about creating blocks. That one's kind of become subtle law in terms of how you do it, and now it's about, well, how do I minimize the blocks that it's going to operate on? So if I do a create blocks, it doesn't create every possible block in the database, or how do I make sure it only calculates what's necessarily out there? There are a few different ways you can do the block creation. It really hasn't changed, and I'm not going to diatribe for a while on create non-missing blocks and why you shouldn't do that, and you should do it different ways. I will tell you that organizing calc scripts, it's still a matter of what do you need to do at the beginning, what do you need to do kind of for the initial part of the calc, how do you need to roll everything up, what do you need to go finish on the end. That's essentially the way a calc all works, is it focuses on, well, what are my index entries, what is my intelligent calc doing, let me go do my calculation of my counts dimension, my time dimensions, and it's going to roll up all of your dimensions, all your dense and all your sparse, and it's sparse, and it's going to do 2 passes at the end, follows the same thing. Now, I will say that there are a lot of things you can do to make things run faster that are still important, and some new ones. So you do have the ability to do calc parallel. That actually dates back to 2007. I didn't remember that it did until I pulled to this presentation, like, oh, that's been in there longer than I thought. You have cache settings that you can change. You lost the ability to fiddle with these for a little while, but they are back. So Essbase 19C, Essbase 21C, you have complete and total capability to fiddle with all of your caches. We'll cover this in our next session that Glenn and I are doing together. Just to give you a little tidbit, Glenn and I are going to run warring Essbase dojos in our next hour. But if I could summarize the difference in Essbase in 19C versus Essbase inside of freeform planning, Essbase inside of freeform planning is kind of like getting an Uber. It'll take you anywhere you want to go, and someone else does the driving, and they have to worry about if the car breaks down. Essbase 19C is more about you own your car. For good or for bad. You can drive whenever you want. It's always available to you. You can put racing stripes down the side. You can also void your warranty. You can open up the hood and start pulling things out. And if the car breaks, that's on you. Some people like owning their car. Some people don't like owning their car. That's one of the big differences between 19C and freeform. The good news is that under 19C, you can fiddle with all those cache settings. Your dense and sparsity are just as important on a block storage cube as they've always been. Your dimension order is important, particularly in terms of your block, particularly important depending on your sparse dimensions, much less important dimension order on your dense dimensions than it was back in 2007. Block size is important, but please do not go around talking about how your block should be 40K or your block should be 100K. We put that to bed like a decade ago. That actually dates back to a few different things. One, it predates parallel calc. Also, the 40 to 100K block size was focusing on what I said in my very first bullet. So if you look up at the screen, the top bullet says your goal for optimization should be to make the nightly calculation run faster. This is back in olden timey days, or as I like to call it, COVID 1 through 18, a more innocent time, when we had to get in a certain calc window. And a lot of companies said, yep, this calc is too big. The database is too big. I have to calculate it between, it's not going to be able to start till 2 a.m. because that's when we get all of our data. And it's got to finish by 7 a.m. when the first people start arriving. Well, nowadays, we have many other methods of taking that calc and improving it. We have aggregate storage, we have hybrid, we have much more scalable hardware than we did back then. Those comments predate Exalytics, they predate the cloud, they predate massive parallelization. So now you're probably not having to worry that you're fitting a one calc into a 5-hour period. So even though these things still do affect your calculation and affect your ability to run faster, I encourage you not to follow all those old tips that are 100% about one thing, speeding up your nightly calc. They did not care if they slowed down your retrieval time. They didn't care if they messed with your load time or that they fiddled with your dimension build time. End user experience was not a concern. They also didn't care if you were using like planning and kicking off a calc repeatedly with a bunch of people doing it simultaneously. So just mentally be aware, all those optimization things that you think are rules were optimized for a different time. Please, Edward, tell me your tales of yore. They were optimized for a different time where we had one big calc to run and we ran it at one time each day. Back then, we were concerned with hard drive space, how much RAM we had, how many CPUs we had. Now, especially with the cloud, when I can go full elastic and just grab as many CPUs as I want at any point, back then, back when RAM cost more than the price of a good sturdy mule, we were limited to, we got to fit the whole thing in 16 gigabytes of RAM. I think my laptop has 64 gigs of RAM. Nowadays, we're not limited by RAM. We're not truly limited by CPU capacity either. We have much more flexibility than we did before. There are still some settings on the SaaS side of Essbase. So Essbase running inside of Planning Cloud, Essbase running inside of FCC, freeform planning that go back to my Uber example. You can't go paint racing stripes on the side of your Uber. Maybe if you paid them a lot, they'd let you. For the most part, even though supposedly from my app, I can tell the driver to switch the radio station, I don't feel like I can. A lot of the settings are that way. You might go, well, I know theoretically I could submit a ticket and ask them to go change some settings, but I really don't want to bother them. If you want full access to just void your warranty, optimize the daylights out of it, you're going to still need standalone Essbase to do that, either Essbase 19C or the very soon to come out Essbase 21C. Some good news, hardware, it used to also have to be that you paid all that money for all that RAM and all those CPUs, all that hard drive space, and you used it all. It was all paid for whether you were using it or not, because we now have the elasticity of the cloud, especially if you're an Oracle EPM cloud where they just decide how much RAM and CPU need. That kind of goes out the window. We also have hybrid that makes a lot of these concerns go away. So I'm going to turn it over to Glenn Schwartzberg for 3 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and show you a slide that makes me not literally laugh my ass off. So Glenn, take it away. Talk about something else major that's changed.
Thanks, Edward. So first of all, in the number of functions that you have since your presentation in 2007, there's probably about 50 or 60 new functions that they've added. One of my favorite of those is the @member@, and I did a play it forward video to tell you about that one. But what I'm really excited about today is something that's available in 19C, and that is what's called calc tuple. So really what it allows you to do is to do a fix in your calc script and pass it, have that passed from an Excel spreadsheet. And so for example, if I've got this spreadsheet right here, if I just did a passing of parameters, I've got basically 10 stores and a couple of products, it's going to take and put those all into the fix statement, and I'm going to get 20, a whole bunch of intersections in addition to all of these intersections as well. So if I just ran this regular, I'm going to get thousands of intersections that it's trying to calculate. If I use this grid calculation that I just showed you, and I do it as the POV one, and I run this, and that's going to be this one, and I launch it, what it's going to tell me, notice that I'm only doing, I'm only reading 5,120 blocks, and I'm writing back to 2,500. So that improves a bit. If I come over to this one and I actually run the one that says a calc tuple, and I'll show you what this one does in just a second, and I run this one, same kind of intersections, but notice that I've gone down by a factor of 10. So while this is a very small example, if I had a really large sheet that I was doing a lot of intersections, I could be calculating, like I say, hundreds of thousands of intersections. This will fix it down to just do those intersections that you've changed. And so the difference between the two that I ran, this one was just doing the products and markets. This one, I'm actually getting the list and I'm selecting, and it's creating the individual tuples. Now I could actually hard code them if I just wanted to do specific tuples. So I find this really, really exciting.
Yeah, it's one of those things. We've tried to do things like this before, where we've said, okay, go from the ancestor of this member all the way up, and the ancestor of this member all the way up. And what it's actually doing is it's creating the intersection of all those from that member on the ancestor all the way up. This actually lets us say take those grid tuples. I do say tuples because I went to a private school. Glenn says tuples, but it takes all of those tuples and says only calculate those exact intersections that you're actually worrying about, which is an awesome new feature. They are adding a bunch to Essbase. We actually had the Essbase roadmap session at the start of the day. We had the future of Essbase. I will tell you, Essbase's future is very, very bright. They are adding a lot of things that are improving calc scripts functionality and performance. By the way, I went, what in God's name is this slide when I saw it? This was the NRL marketing slide from 2007. It's like based in Texas. So yeah, it's like historically we were based in Texas and we did consult nationwide. The preferred Hyperion partner, and I laughed my ass off at Oracle partner as of a month ago. And since our inception 10 years ago, we focused only on Hyperion implementations, training, and publications. Since then, over to Oracle, we've won Oracle's Partner of the Year 5 times. From 2008 till 2017, we were 9 years in a row. Inc. 5000 is one of their fastest growing companies. They didn't have the concept of ACE directors. The cloud wasn't a concept. Appliances weren't even a concept back in 2007. People go, oh, the big thing that's changed from 2007 now is on-prem. Lest we forget, 2012 to 2014, Oracle was obsessed with appliances, the whole Exalytics concept. So we actually went from on-prem custom installs to on-prem appliances pre-installs to the cloud-based world. So we are Oracle's 5-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. We're the current reigning global business analytics partner of the year. This conference this week, it doesn't cost anything for you to attend. It does cost a lot of effort for all the presenters from all the many, many companies to get together and produce this content. People ask us, like, how do you make money on free conferences and free webinars? The answer is simple: volume. So we have a lot more coming back up. Happening over the rest of the year. We're going to focus November on some tools and some best practices. And December, we actually want to show you a lot of new functionality. People have a lot of antiquated ideas about how various products work. So we want to show like the overall EPM framework. We're going to talk about planning. We're going to talk about Essbase 19C. And officially, I am required to put Essbase 19C on there. Knock on fake wood. I do believe that that's going to be 21C. By that point, we'll get to talk about that. So it has been, suffice to say, a crazy year. Anybody 5 years ago who said, this is where I think I'll be in 5 years, those people were wrong. And if you'd asked me in the start of 2007, did I think we'd be doing Solutions 2020? The answer was definitely no. So thank you to 100 plus participants on this same session. Thank you to the 1,400 plus people that are attending sessions over the course of this week. I'm supposed to tell you at this point, you're in session 1165. Please complete your session evaluation. But to be clear, that's not me. And this is targeted for the CIO, so hopefully some of you are CIOs out there. A lot of you have asked questions during the Q&A, and Glenn Schwartzberg, I think, has gotten back to all of them. I am your presenter, Edward Roski. I'm going to go take a quick 15-minute break along with Glenn Schwartzberg from his Q&A answering duties. We'll be back in 15 minutes to have a rousing Warren Karate Dojo debate about Essbase 19C versus freeform planning. Talk to you all soon.